On the morning of May 18, 1992, a football club chairman stood in a hotel lobby in London, holding a sealed envelope he wasn't supposed to have opened. Inside, it was his rival's confidential bid. He picked up the phone, called a television executive he had a personal financial relationship with, and said 4 words that would change the economics of world sport forever. Blow them out of the water. A few hours later, he walked into a ballroom and cast the deciding vote for the company he had just tipped off. Nobody broke a law that day. Nobody went to prison. And the decision that man made single-handedly built the richest football league on the planet. A decision he was allowed to make because he never had to explain the money he personally stood to gain from it. This is the story of how English football's television war began, and how it was decided from the start by a conflict of interest that everyone in the room simply chose not to look at. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to October 1990, 2 years before that hotel lobby phone call. At the time, English football's television money was collected by the Football League and shared out almost equally across all 92 clubs, from Manchester United down to the smallest club in the 4th division. It was, by design, a socialist model in a sport that was about to become anything but. Greg Dyke, an executive at London Weekend Television, thought that model was leaving money on the table. Television audiences, he believed, didn't want to watch 4th division football. They wanted the big clubs, the famous names, the biggest stars. So Dyke quietly invited representatives of the 5 biggest clubs in the country: Liverpool, Manchester United, Everton, Arsenal, and Tottenham, to a private meeting. His pitch was simple. Break away from the rest of English football, form your own division, and keep all the television money for yourselves. The 5 clubs listened. Then they started making calls of their own. By February 1992, the plan had grown from 5 clubs to all 22 members of English football's top flight. Together, they announced they were leaving the Football League to form a brand new competition, the FA Premier League. For the first time, the clubs at the very top would keep 100% of a television deal that hadn't even been negotiated yet. That deal was put out to tender, and 2 broadcasters wanted it badly: ITV, the traditional home of English football, and a struggling satellite upstart called Sky, backed by Rupert Murdoch, that desperately needed a hit product to justify millions of pounds of losses and convince the country to buy a dish. The bidding escalated fast. ITV's early offer was around £160 million over 4 years. Sky came in with £222.5 million over 5. Both sides kept raising, each convinced the other would blink first, because for Sky in particular, this wasn't just about football. It was about survival. If Sky lost this bid, the entire satellite television experiment in Britain might collapse. Everything was set to be decided at a final vote. 1 club, 1 vote, at a hotel in London. And that's where our chairman with the envelope comes in. His name was Alan Sugar. He was the chairman of Tottenham Hotspur, and he was also the founder and majority owner of Amstrad, one of Britain's biggest electronics manufacturers. Amstrad's biggest product line at that moment was satellite dishes. Sky's satellite dishes. If Sky won this television deal and satellite television took off in British homes, Amstrad's factories would run around the clock. Sugar had declared this connection to the other clubs. Declaring it, it turned out, was all that was required. There was no rule stopping him from voting anyway. On the morning of the final vote, Sugar was handed a sealed envelope by an ally inside the process, revealing the exact details of ITV's improved offer before the vote had even happened. He walked to the hotel lobby, phoned Sky Chief Executive Sam Chisholm directly, and read him the numbers. Multiple witnesses later described hearing Sugar tell Chisholm, in essence, "Don't just beat this offer. Humiliate it. Blow them out of the water." Sky raised its bid one final time to £304 million over 5 years, nearly 8 times what ITV had paid for the previous rights deal just 4 years earlier. When the clubs cast their votes that afternoon, Sky won by 14 votes to 6. It needed a two-thirds majority to pass. Sugar's vote was the one that got them there. Amstrad's share price jumped by roughly £7 million in value the moment the deal was announced. Sugar had voted with a football club's ballot paper and profited with his own separate company's balance sheet. And it was, technically, completely within the rules. What followed was not just a television contract. It was the beginning of an empire. Sky bundled its Premier League coverage with slick production, dramatic theme music, and a message that this wasn't just football anymore, it was entertainment. Kick-off times were moved to suit television schedules rather than fans in the stadium. The BBC, cut out of live rights entirely, was handed a highlights-only package for £40 million, which brought Match of the Day back from the dead as a consolation prize. For the next 15 years, Sky effectively owned English football's television rights outright. The Premier League's television income didn't just grow, it exploded, doubling to £670 million by 1997 and continuing to climb every renewal after that. Wages rose, transfer fees rose, stadiums were rebuilt, the biggest clubs in England became some of the wealthiest sporting institutions on the planet, and it all traced back to one broadcaster's total, unchallenged control of the product. Nobody was fixing matches. Nobody needed to. Control the pipe the money flows through, and you control everything downstream of it. Eventually, regulators noticed what had been obvious to everyone in football for over a decade. Sky's total dominance of live Premier League rights wasn't just commercially convenient, it was, under European law, an illegal restriction on competition. In 2006, the European Commission forced the Premier League's hand. Rights could no longer be auctioned off as one single, exclusive package to one broadcaster. From now on, matches had to be split across multiple packages, sold to multiple bidders, whether Sky liked it or not. A new challenger, Setanta Sports, stepped into the gap, winning 2 of the new packages and briefly becoming Sky's first genuine live football rival in Britain. It didn't last. Setanta had expanded too fast, borrowed too aggressively, and failed to attract enough subscribers to cover its costs. In June 2009, after missing a £10 million payment to the Premier League, Setanta collapsed into administration and went off air within days. Its rights were picked up by ESPN. The lesson. Regulators had tried to force onto the market real competition, had produced one genuine winner, the Premier League itself, which now had multiple broadcasters bidding against each other for the same product. That lesson paid off spectacularly in 2012, when a new challenger arrived with real financial firepower. BT. BT stormed into the bidding for the 2013 to 2016 rights cycle, and this time, the numbers were staggering. Sky retained the lion's share, 5 of 7 available packages, 116 matches a season, for £2.3 billion. But BT walked away with 2 packages of its own, 38 matches a season, for £738 million. Combined, the deal was worth just over £3 billion, more than £1 billion higher than the previous cycle. The war that started with one man's phone call in a hotel lobby had, 20 years later, turned English football's broadcast rights into one of the single most valuable media properties on the planet, with rights fees that would climb past £5 billion within a few years, long after Sky, ITV, Setanta, and BT had all taken their turns fighting over it. Nobody involved in the events of May 1992 broke the law. Alan Sugar disclosed his connection to Amstrad before the vote. The rules, as written, allowed him to vote anyway. Everything that happened afterward, the leaked bid, the phone call, the winning margin, the share price jump, was, technically, permitted. That's precisely why the story matters. English football's entire modern economy, the transfer fees, the wages, the global television empire, was set in motion not by a conspiracy that had to be uncovered decades later, but by a conflict of interest that happened in full view, that nobody had the authority to stop, and that nobody was ever punished for. Sometimes the biggest deal in the history of a sport isn't the one that gets fixed in the shadows. It's the one that gets voted on in broad daylight, by a man who had every reason to make sure it went a certain way, and no rule telling him he couldn't.